FBI Director Marcus Reed had dealt with plenty of bad cops in his time. He'd seen the arrogance, the power trips, the blatant disregard for the law they were supposed to uphold. But tonight? Tonight he was just a man trying to get home. It had been a long day. Meetings, press briefings, internal investigations. His head was pounding and all he wanted was to get inside, kick off his shoes and pour himself a drink. He was less than 10 minutes away from his house when the red and blue lights lit up behind him. Marcus sighed, glancing at his speedometer. He wasn't speeding. He hadn't run a light. No broken taillights, no reason, at least not a real one. He exhaled through his nose, already knowing exactly what was about to happen. Pulling over, he put the car in park and rested his hands on the wheel. Standard protocol, no sudden moves. No excuses for whatever trigger-happy fool had decided to mess with him tonight. The cop took his time approaching. Marcus checked his side mirror. White guy, maybe mid-40s, built like he spent all his free time at the range. The type who probably still bragged about his high school football days. The type Marcus had seen abuse their badge more times than he cared to count. Officer Daniel Briggs stopped just short of the window, hand resting on his holster, like he was already anticipating trouble. License and registration. No greeting, no explanation. Marcus turned his head slowly, keeping his expression neutral. Mind telling me why I'm being stopped? Briggs's eyes flicked over Marcus's suit, his expensive watch, the unmarked black government-issued SUV he was driving. But he wasn't seeing any of that. He was seeing a black man in a nice car. Nothing else. I said license and registration. Marcus fought the urge to roll his eyes. He reached toward his glove box, slowly, deliberately, grabbing the documents before handing them over. Here. Now tell me why I was pulled over. Briggs didn't even look at the ID. Just kept staring, like he was waiting for an excuse. Step out of the car. Marcus let out a short laugh, more out of disbelief than amusement. For what? Briggs took half a step closer. I gave you an order. Marcus clenched his jaw. Oh, this guy was itching for a reason, looking for any small excuse to escalate. And if Marcus weren't who he was, if he didn't know exactly how these things played out, he might have given it to him. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, voice calm but firm. You sure you want to do this? Briggs's lips curled into a smirk. Oh, I really do. Marcus had been in high-pressure situations before. Hostage negotiations, counter-terrorism briefings, high-stakes arrests. He knew how to keep his cool. But right now, standing on the side of a dimly lit road with a power-tripping cop's hand hovering over his gun, he wasn't just dealing with a bad officer. He was dealing with a dangerous one. He kept his voice measured. Officer, I already gave you my license. What exactly am I being stopped for? Briggs scoffed, shifting his stance like he was ready for a fight. You're being uncooperative. Marcus raised a brow. Uncooperative? He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't moved aggressively. Hell, he was doing everything by the book, but he already knew. None of that mattered. Keep your hands where I can see them, Briggs suddenly barked, reaching for his holster. Marcus froze. His hands were already visible, resting lightly on the steering wheel. You need to calm down, he said evenly, though his pulse had started hammering against his ribs. Briggs wasn't listening. His fingers twitched over the grip of his gun like he was debating whether this was his moment to be the big hero, the guy who took down the threat. Marcus inhaled slowly, carefully keeping his movements deliberate. I'm reaching for my ID, just like you asked. Don't move! The gun was out now, pointed directly at him. A few yards away, the sound of shuffling feet and murmuring voices cut through the tension. Marcus shifted his gaze slightly, catching sight of people gathering on the sidewalk. Phones up, recording, witnessing. Briggs must have noticed too because his lip curled in frustration. He didn't like an audience. One of the bystanders, a woman in a hoodie, called out, Hey man, why you got a gun on him? He ain't doing nothing. Briggs ignored her, but his jaw clenched. Marcus saw his opening. He exhaled slowly, locking eyes with the officer. Put the gun down now, he said, voice low but commanding. Briggs flinched slightly. Like, for the first time, he realized something was off. The way Marcus spoke. The way he carried himself. The way he wasn't begging or scrambling. For the first time, Briggs hesitated. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. The cameras were rolling. The crowd was growing. And Marcus was done playing. Marcus didn't move. His hands stayed right where everyone could see them, flat on the roof of his car, fingers spread. But his voice carried weight. "I'm the director of the FBI," he said, slow and clear. "Put the gun down." For a second, the street went dead silent. The bystanders, the distant hum of traffic, even the damn crickets. It was like the whole world hit pause. Then Briggs snorted, "Yeah, right." The officer's grip tightened around the gun, his confidence returning in full force. "Nice try. You think dropping some fake title is gonna get you out of this?" Marcus didn't blink. "Look me up." Briggs smirked. "Oh yeah? You a big shot, huh?" His finger inched dangerously close to the trigger. "I said," Marcus's voice dropped, lethal and steady, "put the gun down." The tension in the air was suffocating. One of the bystanders whispered, "Wait, Marcus Reed?" "The Marcus Reed." Another voice piped up, "Bro, he's not lying, that's him." Briggs's confidence faltered for a split second. His smirk twitched, like his brain was just starting to connect the dots. But instead of lowering his gun, he doubled down. "I don't give a damn who you are," he snapped. "You're not above the law." Marcus let out a low, humorless chuckle. "Neither are you." Briggs's nostrils flared. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. People were recording, whispering, shifting closer. A few had even pulled up Google on their phones, the glow of Marcus's official FBI photo reflecting off their screens. The murmurs turned into a buzz. A man in a baseball cap muttered, "Oh, he's screwed." Someone else laughed nervously. "Dude really pulled a gun on the FBI director?" Briggs' partner, Officer Taylor, finally spoke. His voice was tight, uneasy. Briggs?" Briggs ignored him, still locked in a standoff with Marcus. His hands twitched around the gun, his breath coming fast and shallow. Marcus took a slow step forward, still keeping his hands up, voice calm but firm. "You got one last chance, Officer Briggs." Briggs's jaw clenched. His pride was fighting a losing battle against reality. Taylor, who had been standing frozen, suddenly grabbed his radio and muttered something under his breath. Briggs's eyes flicked to him, his stance wavering. Then, like a switch flipping, Briggs finally realized. This wasn't some bluff. This wasn't some random guy trying to talk his way out of trouble. This was Marcus Reed, and he had just made the worst mistake of his career. The sound of screeching tires cut through the tense night air as another squad car pulled up. The doors flew open, and out stepped Sergeant Olivia Harris, her sharp eyes scanning the scene in an instant. Her stomach dropped the second she saw who was standing in front of Officer Briggs's drawn gun. "Oh, hell no," she muttered under her breath before storming forward. "Briggs, stand down, now!" Her voice cracked like a whip, sharp enough to snap everyone's attention to her. Briggs barely glanced at her, his grip still tight on the gun. "Stay out of this, Sarge. This guy's refusing to comply." Olivia stopped dead in her tracks. "This guy?" She turned to Marcus, and her heart slammed against her ribs. "Director Reed," she breathed, her voice laced with pure horror. Marcus didn't move, didn't break eye contact with Briggs. "Took you long enough, Sergeant." Briggs scoffed. "Wait, you know this clown?" Olivia's jaw tightened. "Are you out of your damn mind, Briggs?" She turned to Taylor, who looked like he wanted to disappear. "Tell me you didn't let him pull a gun on the highest-ranking federal law enforcement officer in the country." Taylor swallowed hard. I tried to tell him." Briggs barked out a laugh, shaking his head. "No way. No way this guy is FBI Director Marcus Reed." His eyes flicked back to Marcus, suspicious. "You expect me to believe that?" Olivia grabbed her radio. "Dispatch, confirm identity for Director Marcus Reed, FBI." A few crackling seconds passed. Then, "Confirmed. Director Marcus Reed, Federal Bureau of Investigation." Briggs's entire body went rigid. The blood drained from his face so fast he nearly swayed. The crowd murmured louder now, people whispering and pointing. Some were laughing in disbelief. "Yo, he's screwed," someone muttered. Briggs's breath hitched, his grip on the gun slipping. No, this is some kind of trick." Marcus's eyes remained cold and unyielding. "Go ahead. Keep pointing that weapon at me, Officer Briggs." His voice was deadly calm. "See how that works out for you." Briggs' hands were shaking now. His entire career, his entire life flashed before his eyes. Olivia stepped forward, her voice low and sharp. "You just pulled a gun on the director of the FBI, Briggs." she exhaled, shaking her head. You are so damn done. Briggs's face was ashen, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. His hands, still trembling, slowly lowered the gun. The weight of what he had just done crashed down on him like a tidal wave. The crowd had gone silent, all eyes locked onto the man who had just aimed his weapon at the director of the FBI. The tension in the air was suffocating. Marcus didn't move an inch. He adjusted his suit jacket, brushed non-existent dust from his sleeve, and spoke with quiet authority. I want him in cuffs, now. Briggs's mouth fell open. Wait! Olivia's heart pounded. She knew there was no talking her way out of this. No protecting Briggs from what had to happen. She had seen officers get fired over far less than this. But this? This was career-ending, life-destroying, unforgivable. Still, her hands hesitated for a fraction of a second before reaching for her cuffs. Sir, she started, but Marcus cut her off. You saw the body cam. You heard the radio. You know what just happened here, he said, his tone steely. Do your job, Sergeant. Briggs stepped back in a panic, shaking his head wildly. This is a misunderstanding. I didn't know who you were. His voice cracked, desperation seeping through. Come on, man, I wasn't trying to... Marcus's expression didn't change. You weren't trying to what, Briggs? He took a single step forward. Kill another unarmed black man? Abuse your authority? Throw your weight around without accountability? Briggs's mouth opened, then closed. Marcus's voice never rose, but the weight behind it was enough to make Briggs flinch. You didn't know who I was. Marcus tilted his head. That's the only reason you're scared right now. Because you pulled this exact stunt on the wrong black man. The words hit like a gut punch. Briggs stumbled, looking around for support but found none. His partner, Officer Taylor, had already taken a cautious step away from him. The crowd? They were recording everything. And Olivia? She was already snapping the cuffs around his wrists. Briggs barely had time to process what was happening before Olivia locked the cuffs around his wrists. The cold metal clamped down, and his whole body stiffened. This is a mistake, he muttered, his voice shaking. You can't do this. Oh, I can, Marcus cut in smoothly. He adjusted his tie, completely unfazed. And I will. The weight of those words settled in as Olivia led Briggs toward the squad car. The crowd, still filming, murmured in a mix of shock and satisfaction. Someone muttered, about damn time. Briggs thrashed. Wait, I just, come on, I didn't know. Exactly, Marcus said it, and that's the real problem, isn't it? Briggs's protests faded as Olivia shoved him into the back seat and slammed the door shut. Marcus exhaled, rolling his shoulders back before pulling out his phone. One call. That's all it would take. He dialed the Department of Justice. This is Director Reed, he said when the line connected. We've got a situation. The response was immediate. Within minutes, higher-ups were alerted. Internal affairs was flagged, and the wheels of justice were already grinding forward. Marcus turned to Olivia. I trust you'll make sure the report is thorough? She swallowed hard, nodding. Yes, sir. Good, because there was no way in hell this was getting buried. By the time Marcus arrived home that night, the news had already broken. FBI director unlawfully detained by local police officer. Traffic stop gone wrong. Officer arrested after pulling gun on federal official. Social media exploded. The footage spread like wildfire. The rage was instant. Marcus leaned back in his chair, watching the headlines roll in. Good, let them all see. Cameras flashed as the police chief stepped up to the podium, his face tight with stress. The room was packed. Journalists, activists, city officials, all waiting for answers. This department does not condone racial profiling or excessive force, he began, his voice strained. Officer Briggs has been placed on unpaid leave pending a full investigation. A reporter shot up. Unpaid leave? He pulled a gun on the FBI director. The chief cleared his throat. We are cooperating with federal authorities. Isn't it true, another reporter cut in, that Briggs has a history of excessive force complaints? Why was he still on the force? The chief shifted uncomfortably. He had no real answer, and everyone knew it. Outside, the protests had already begun. No justice, no peace! Signs waved through the air. Hold bad cops accountable. The footage of the traffic stop played on massive screens, on news channels, on every phone in sight. Lawmakers weighed in. We need stronger policies against racial profiling, one congresswoman declared. The system enables this kind of abuse, an activist added, during a live interview. Briggs isn't the first. The question is, will he be the last? Meanwhile, at the department, the tension was thick. Officers who had backed Briggs before were suddenly quiet. "Man, I didn't know he was the FBI director," one officer muttered. "That's different." "Nah," another one said, shaking his head. "It shouldn't be different, that's the point." Briggs, locked in an interrogation room, watched the news feed on a mounted TV. His face was plastered everywhere. His name was trending. His career? Over. He leaned back in his chair, breathing heavy. He had finally learned what it felt like to have no power at all. Briggs sat in silence as internal affairs officers read over their findings. His career, everything he had worked for, was slipping away, and he knew there was nothing he could do to stop it. "The body cam footage speaks for itself," one investigator said, flipping a folder shut. "There's no justifying what you did." Briggs swallowed hard. "I didn't know who he was." "Does it matter?" the investigator shot back. "That's the problem. You saw a black man in a nice car and assumed he was a threat." Briggs had no comeback. By the next morning, the police department issued a statement. "Officer Daniel Briggs has been terminated, effective immediately." The news spread fast. His fellow officers avoided him like he was contagious. Even the ones who used to laugh at his jokes. The ones who had his back, gone. "You really screwed up, man," one of them muttered before walking away. Briggs tried to apply to smaller precincts, security jobs, anything in law enforcement, but every call ended the same way. "Yeah, sorry, we're gonna go in a different direction." He turned on the news, hoping for some kind of support. Instead, he saw his own face on the screen, plastered next to headlines like "Rogue Cop Gets What He Deserves" and "No Room for Racists in Law Enforcement." Briggs slammed the remote down. For the first time in his life, he was the one on the outside looking in. Marcus stood at the podium, cameras flashing, microphones pointed at him from every angle. The room was packed. Reporters, activists, politicians, even high-ranking law enforcement officials who wouldn't normally be caught dead at a press conference like this. But today was different. Today, they had no choice but to listen. He took a deep breath, scanning the sea of faces. Some were supportive, nodding along. Others, skeptical, arms crossed, waiting for him to say something they could twist or dismiss. But he didn't care. He wasn't here to make anyone comfortable. He was here to speak the truth. "This isn't just about me," he said, his voice steady, deliberate. "This happens every single day to black men across this country, men who don't have a badge to protect them." The room fell dead silent. Even the usual murmur of whispers and shifting chairs stopped. "This country has a problem," he continued, locking eyes with a few uniformed officers in the front row. "A problem that goes beyond one bad cop, beyond one bad department. It's a system that allows officers like Briggs to act without fear of consequences, and that must change." The tension in the room was thick. The police chief shifted uncomfortably. A senator in the back looked down at her notes. But the cameras kept rolling, and Marcus wasn't done. "We've seen it too many times. Traffic stops that turn into arrests. Arrests that turn into brutality. And for what? Because a black man is in a nice car? Because a black man dares to ask questions?" He shook his head, his anger barely contained. "This system wasn't built to protect people like us. And if we don't change it, the next man this happens to won't be able to stand here and speak about it. He'll be another name on a protest sign." The words hit hard. Within minutes, the clip spread like wildfire. Social media exploded. News outlets played it on repeat. "This isn't just about me" started trending worldwide. By morning, politicians who had stayed silent were suddenly calling for action. Protests erupted in every major city. Crowds chanting, "This isn't just about me! This isn't just about me!" The Department of Justice moved fast. New policies were proposed. Mandatory racial bias training, stricter hiring protocols, federal oversight on departments with a history of misconduct. Some law enforcement agencies welcomed the change, acknowledging they had ignored the issue for too long. Others fought back, claiming the government was overstepping. But the pressure was relentless. The public wasn't backing down. The message was clear. The old ways were no longer acceptable. For the first time in a long time, it felt like change wasn't just a conversation. It was happening. Law enforcement agencies across the country were forced to look in the mirror. Some didn't like what they saw. Others finally understood what had been clear all along. Marcus refuses to let this be just another headline that fades away in a week. He knows how these stories usually go. Public outrage burns bright for a moment, then dies out, replaced by the next scandal. Not this time. He uses every resource at his disposal, his platform, his influence, his connections, to expose more cases just like his. He speaks at universities, law enforcement conferences, and public forums, making sure people understand that his experience was not unique. He demands accountability, not just for Briggs, but for the entire system that enables officers like him. The Department of Justice launches a deeper investigation into racial profiling and excessive force within the police department, uncovering a disturbing pattern of misconduct. Cases that had been swept under the rug resurface. Officers who once felt untouchable now find themselves under scrutiny. Some resign before they can be fired, while others desperately try to justify their actions. But the tide has turned. The country is watching. Meanwhile, Briggs vanishes. No job, no future in law enforcement, no redemption arc waiting for him. He tries to apply for private security work, but no company wants to be associated with his name. His mugshot circulates online, becoming a viral symbol of what happens when arrogance and unchecked power collide. The internet turns him into a meme. His name becomes a verb. Don't get yourself Briggsed, meaning don't let your own ego cost you everything. At first, he tries to defend himself. He gives an interview, blaming cancel culture and insisting he was just doing his job. But the backlash is immediate and relentless. The body cam footage doesn't lie. The public doesn't buy his excuses. After that, he deletes all his social media and disappears from the public eye. But Marcus, he's just getting started. His case sets off a chain reaction. New laws get drafted, police training programs are restructured. Federal oversight committees start holding departments accountable in ways they never did before. For the first time, real change seems possible. Protests erupt, but this time, they lead to real policy discussions. Police chiefs across the country are forced to answer tough questions. Local governments implement stricter hiring standards and new de-escalation protocols. Officers are now required to undergo extensive anti-bias training. Other high-ranking law enforcement officials back Marcus's push for reform. Judges, politicians, and civil rights leaders rally behind him, using his case as a turning point. For once, it feels like the people in power are actually listening. The story doesn't just fade into the archives of forgotten scandals. It becomes a permanent mark on history, a reminder that unchecked authority leads to downfall, but real accountability, that's where the real power lies.